Anubis's profound importance is further illuminated by the numerous epithets and titles bestowed upon him by the ancient Egyptians, which collectively define the breadth of his duties across the vast necropolises of Egypt, and these titles often dictated the focus of worship in specific geographical cult centers. Beyond his primary role as the foremost of the Westerners, a title he shared with and later ceded to Osiris, Anubis was revered as Lord of the Sacred Land, which designated him as the sovereign ruler and physical guardian of the desert cemeteries, ensuring that all rituals were observed and tombs remained undisturbed by both human looters and natural scavengers, an aspect tied closely to his jackal form. Another crucial epithet was he who is in the place of embalming, imiut, a title that gave rise to a powerful fetish, a stuffed, headless skin of an animal, often a jackal or ox, suspended on a pole, which symbolized the god's presence during the mummification process itself, acting as a visual marker of the sanctified sterile workspace. The principal center of his early worship was Sinopolis, meaning city of dogs in Greek, ancient Egyptian Saka, a site that clearly highlights the central importance of the canine aspect of his divinity. But he was also venerated heavily in Abydos and Saqqara due to their status as major burial grounds, confirming his widespread influence over the entire mortuary complex of Egypt. Furthermore, Anubis's power extended to the most intimate details of the embalming rite, where he was directly connected to the 4 canopic jars, which were essential vessels used to store the vital organs removed during mummification. Each jar was guarded by one of the 4 sons of Horus: Imseti, human head; liver, Hapi, baboon head; lungs, Duamutef, jackal head, stomach; and Kebesenuef, falcon head, intestines. And while Duamutef was a jackal-headed deity, it was Anubis who ritually supervised the placement and sealing of all 4 jars, ensuring the organs were protected and ready for the body's rebirth. This specialized role emphasizes that Anubis was not just the cosmic guide, but the master ritualist whose authority permeated every physical step taken by the embalmers in the workshops, ensuring the transformation from corpse to immortal being was completed without failure. Although Anubis is the most famous jackal or wild dog deity of the Egyptian pantheon, his identity must be clearly distinguished from Wepwawet, also known as Upuwaut, another canine god who played a distinct, though often overlapping role in funerary and royal rituals. While Anubis is typically depicted as having black fur, symbolizing the fertile soil of the Nile, rebirth, and the decay of the body, Wepwawet is often shown with gray or white fur, marking him as a different, though closely related divine figure. Wepwawet's name translates literally to "opener of the ways," a title he holds in a broader, more physical sense than Anubis's spiritual guidance. Wepwawet was primarily a warrior god and the divine scout who literally led the pharaoh's armies in battle and symbolically cleared the path for the pharaoh during jubilee festivals. However, in funerary contexts, Wepwawet's opening referred specifically to opening the path through the Duat, the underworld, for the deceased, a role that brought him into association with Anubis, and in some temples, such as those in Abydos, Wepwawet and Anubis were worshipped side by side, or even syncretized, reflecting the overlapping importance of their path-opening and guiding functions. Wepwawet was also the focus of a powerful royal cult, presiding over the royal city of Asiut, Lycopolis, and this connection highlights a key difference. Wepwawet was strongly associated with the living king and the processes of earthly royalty and military might, whereas Anubis's primary domain remained strictly the dead and the ritual processes of transformation. Both gods demonstrate the powerful symbolism of the canine form in Egyptian culture, not as a simple pet, but as a fierce, intelligent guide capable of navigating the chaos of the wilderness, the battlefield, or the afterlife. But Anubis's power was uniquely focused on the embalming ritual and the final meticulous judgment of the soul, while Wepwawet's power was centered on forward movement and the violent or symbolic removal of obstacles.
The definitive and most consistent visual characteristic of Anubis, his black fur, is not merely an artistic choice, but a profoundly significant theological statement that underscores his unique power and his direct connection to the concepts of death, fertility, and rebirth in ancient Egypt. Unlike other deities whose colors might vary based on context, Anubis's black color is immutable and symbolic. It does not represent the literal color of the desert jackal, but rather the color of the fertile black earth, Kemet, left behind by the annual flooding of the Nile, which symbolized life, fertility, and the potential for rebirth, and this association links Anubis's power directly to the promise of resurrection that Osiris embodied, suggesting that death is not an end, but a return to the dark, nourishing source from which new life springs. Furthermore, the black color also served as a protective symbol, specifically representing the dark staining of the corpse by the natron and resins used during the process of mummification, a process over which Anubis presided. By associating his divine form with the physical outcome of the embalming process, his black skin became a visual guarantee that the deceased had been properly transformed and sealed for eternity. This divine presence was made manifest during the 70-day mummification ritual, where the chief embalming priest, known as the god's butler, would wear a distinct jackal mask while performing the most sacred parts of the process, particularly the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was intended to symbolically restore the deceased's senses so they could speak, eat, and breathe in the afterlife. By donning the mask, the priest ritually became the god, acting as Anubis's agent to ensure the body was perfectly prepared and protected from spiritual threats before its journey to the Hall of Two Truths, where Anubis would await the soul for its final judgment. This ritualistic embodiment demonstrates that Anubis was not a distant deity, but an active, physical participant in the most important transition of the Egyptian life cycle, making him a tangible source of comfort and security for the bereaved.
Beyond his roles as the divine embalmer and the meticulous weigher of the heart, Anubis possessed a subtle yet critical moral authority within the Egyptian pantheon, acting as an intercessor and an advocate for the deceased against the forces of cosmic disorder, primarily represented by his estranged mythological relative, Set. Although Set was his father in some traditions, or at least his stepfather, Anubis's unwavering loyalty was always to Osiris, and this commitment placed him squarely in the camp of Ma'at, order, against Isfet, chaos, reinforcing his position as a protector of the righteous dead. In various funerary spells and inscriptions from the Book of the Dead, the deceased often directly appeals to Anubis, not just to guide them, but to defend their case before the great Ennead of gods, asking him to certify that the mummification rituals were correctly performed and that the heart was indeed pure and light as the feather of Ma'at. This plea to Anubis highlights his reputation for impartiality and honesty, assuring the deceased that the complex, high-stakes trial of the heart would be conducted without divine prejudice or influence. Furthermore, his power was directly involved in neutralizing the ongoing chaotic threats posed by Set and his demonic allies, who continually sought to attack and dismember the body of Osiris, and by extension, the bodies of all the righteous dead. Anubis's rituals, particularly the placement of amulets and the chanting of protective spells over the corpse, served as a final powerful defense against these forces of destruction, guaranteeing that the deceased would remain whole and intact for all eternity. Thus, Anubis's authority was not solely procedural or technical. It was deeply ethical, making him a powerful moral champion who worked tirelessly to ensure that the promise of the afterlife, a promise underpinned by the sacrifice and resurrection of Osiris, was justly and successfully delivered to all those who lived according to the principles of order and truth. Anubis's iconic depiction,
The duality of his form, the man with the jackal head, is a crucial symbolic representation of the boundary he governs, emphasizing that his power is neither fully wild nor fully civilized, but exists at the liminal space between the two, a perfect metaphor for the passage between life and death. The jackal head connects him to the untamed, dangerous forces of the desert and natural decay, acknowledging that mortality is a raw, primal process, while the human body grants him the necessary intelligence, ritual competence, and civilized demeanor to execute the complex procedures of embalming and celestial judgment. This dual nature allowed him to be both the fierce protector who drove away scavengers from the tomb and the gentle, trustworthy guide who led the deceased soul through the perilous Duat. While most narratives focus on male priests and pharaohs, Anubis's cult, especially in funerary practices, also involved significant female participation. Women often played a central role in the mourning and preparation rituals, and historical evidence suggests the existence of Anubis priestesses, though their exact title and functions varied regionally. These women were crucial in the religious administration, particularly in organizing the elaborate 70-day ceremonies and reciting the protective incantations over the deceased, ensuring that the goddesses associated with mourning, Isis and Nephthys, were properly invoked alongside Anubis. This female presence underscored the belief that the transition into the afterlife required not only the technical expertise of Anubis, but also the nurturing and restorative powers of the divine feminine to ensure the rebirth was complete. The cult of Anubis eventually declined, not through defeat, but through the rise of new religious paradigms. His active worship faded dramatically with the ascendancy of Christianity in Egypt, which rejected the traditional polytheistic pantheon and funerary practices like mummification. However, his image and functions were subtly absorbed, as the concept of a singular, impartial arbiter of the dead persisted in the Coptic tradition, demonstrating that the deeply ingrained need for a faithful, vigilant guardian at the threshold of eternity ensured that the essence of Anubis's power endured, even after the temples dedicated to the jackal god fell silent.
Anubis's protective power was not merely symbolic. It was ritually and physically woven into the very fabric of the burial customs through the use of powerful funerary amulets and charms placed directly upon the mummy, affirming his role as the great overseer of the body's integrity. While many amulets held specific divine protection, Anubis's authority often sanctioned their usage, guaranteeing their efficacy against spiritual corruption and decay. Crucial protective symbols like the Jed pillar, representing stability and Osiris's backbone, and the Tayet knot, or Isis knot, representing the power of Isis's blood and magic, were placed under the direct supervision of the embalming priests, who operated under Anubis's name, ensuring that stability and magic were correctly imparted to the deceased. Beyond these physical protections, Anubis served as the ultimate psychopomp, the literal guide of souls, whose influence was central to the soul's successful traversal of the terrifying and chaotic Duat, the underworld. The Book of the Dead is replete with spells and prayers specifically directed to Anubis, appealing to him to know the secret pathways and hidden gates of the netherworld, as it was believed that only the jackal god, who had roamed the desert and understood the geography of death, possessed the necessary knowledge to safely lead the soul through the various trials and past the various monstrous guardians that waited in the 12 hours of the night. This guidance was often narrated in the first person by the deceased, who, having been embalmed by the god's agents, considered Anubis their most trusted and constant companion throughout the arduous journey, distinguishing him from Osiris, who waited only at the end. Anubis's role as the guide emphasizes his compassion and faithfulness, confirming that he was the benevolent protector of the helpless soul, ensuring that the deceased arrived whole, sound, and fully prepared to face the unblinking final judgment of the scales, which he himself would meticulously balance.
Anubis's power extended beyond the physical rites and the Duat's geography. His certain and meticulous role in the weighing of the heart served as a profound force of moral governance in the Egyptian civil society, dictating the ethical conduct of the living. Since every individual knew that their heart, the seat of intelligence, memory, and morality, would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at by the jackal god himself, the certainty of this impartial judgment became a cornerstone of Egyptian ethics, encouraging citizens to live a life governed by Ma'at, cosmic order, truth, and justice, to avoid the dreaded second death in the jaws of Ammit. This moral imperative elevated Anubis from a simple god of decay to a celestial enforcer of righteousness, ensuring that divine accountability was an inescapable reality and profoundly influencing the daily interactions and legal integrity of the human world. Furthermore, the relationship between Anubis and Horus, Osiris's son, the Avenger, and the living king, was a crucial, often overlooked dynamic within the Osirisan cycle. While Anubis was the faithful servant and embalmer of the father, Osiris, he also acted as a powerful protector of the son, Horus, particularly during Horus's infancy and his battles against the chaotic god Set. This alliance established Anubis as a guardian of the royal line itself. By protecting the infant Horus, Anubis guaranteed the continuation of the pharaonic lineage, which spiritually anchored the entire Egyptian state and cosmos. In the Book of the Dead, especially in chapter 125, which details the judgment process, Anubis is the presiding liturgical voice, dictating the complex protocol and ensuring that the deceased's negative confession, the declaration of innocence against 42 sins, is properly recited. The text grants Anubis the power of cosmic recognition, allowing him to verify the identity and purity of the soul before presenting the result to the final tribunal of Osiris, solidifying his status as the indispensable, impartial officer of justice whose technical and ethical precision guaranteed the integrity of the most important ritual in Egyptian religion.
The underlying tension between Anubis and the chaotic god Set provided a crucial theological justification for Anubis's continuous role as the protector of the dead and the keeper of order, emphasizing that the jackal god was the ultimate sentinel against destructive forces in both the natural and spiritual realms. While Set represented chaos, Isfet, violence, and the dismemberment of Osiris, Anubis represented the meticulous care, restoration, and Ma'at, order, necessary to counter Set's actions, making their conflict a perpetual divine struggle over the integrity of the deceased body. Anubis's protection was most pronounced in the royal tombs, particularly those in the Valley of the Kings, where his image was frequently painted or carved directly onto the tomb walls and sarcophagi, to serve as a perpetual, vigilant guardian against all forms of intrusion and corruption. This physical presence of Anubis underscores the belief that his power ensured the pharaoh, who was the spiritual anchor of Egypt, could successfully transition into the afterlife and achieve resurrection, thus safeguarding the entire cosmos. And the discovery of his shrine and figure prominently in the tomb of Tutankhamun further confirms his vital status in royal funerary equipment. Unlike many other gods whose powers were general or cosmological, Anubis's power was intensely personal and practical, focused on the immediate physical and spiritual danger facing the individual's soul, guaranteeing safety from both tomb robbers and the demonic spirits that Set might send to disrupt the body's passage. This dedicated protection against the forces of decay and disorder cemented Anubis's image as the most reliable and unwavering ally the Egyptians could hope for at the moment of their greatest vulnerability. Furthermore, the modern fascination with Anubis continues this ancient association, as his striking image has become a globally recognized symbol of the mysteries of Egyptian death rituals, influencing countless works of fiction, film, and art, where he invariably embodies the solemn, impartial, and powerful guardian who holds the keys to the final judgment,
a cultural longevity that rivals even Osiris and Ra, proving that the silent, watchful jackal god has truly achieved the eternal Akh, spirit, the Egyptians sought.
The positioning of Anubis within the Egyptian cosmology establishes him as a critical theological bridge, linking the earthly life of the deceased directly to the daily cosmic cycle of the sun god Ra and the promise of celestial rebirth, ensuring that his function transcended the mere preparation of the dead body. While Osiris ruled the netherworld, the ultimate goal for the elite deceased was to join Ra on his solar barge in the sky and participate in the sun's daily resurrection. Anubis's role as the guide was thus indispensable, as he ensured the soul was pure enough and intact enough to undertake the final ascent from the terrestrial Duat to the celestial Akhet, the horizon. This solar connection is subtly yet powerfully reinforced by Anubis's epithets, which sometimes link him to the morning, reflecting the idea that having successfully guided the soul through the darkest hours of the night in the Duat, Anubis delivers it to the dawn of a new, eternal day on Ra's barge. The Egyptian worldview saw the sun's nightly journey through the underworld as a parallel for the human soul's journey through death, and Anubis was the most skilled navigator of both, capable of traversing the deepest gloom without losing his way. His ancient status as the son of Ra in some early traditions further solidifies this link, suggesting that even before the rise of Osiris, Anubis's power was fundamentally tied to the grand, eternal cycle of creation, destruction, and recreation that governed the universe. Therefore, the moment the deceased's heart was balanced by Anubis and the soul was deemed ma'at true, it was essentially prepared for integration into the highest echelon of divine power, the celestial court of the sun god. This connection transforms the embalmer god into an agent of cosmic destiny, proving that his technical competence over the body ultimately facilitated the soul's highest spiritual aspiration, eternal fusion with the unending life force of Ra.
Anubis's most profound and mystical power lay in his ability to ritually facilitate the transformation of the fragile, decaying corpse into the durable Sa, or mummy, thereby ensuring the continuity of the two vital spiritual components, the Ba, soul or personality, and the Ka, life force or double. Egyptian belief held that the Ka was intrinsic to life, but after death, it required the physical body to remain recognizable and intact to have a stable home. The meticulous process of mummification, supervised by Anubis, was designed precisely to achieve this stable platform. By protecting the body from decay and providing the correct funerary equipment, Anubis's rites allowed the Ka to securely inhabit the mummy and receive offerings, ensuring the deceased continued to sustain the vital life energy necessary for existence in the afterlife. The Ba, which was often depicted as a human-headed bird, was the component that could travel between the tomb and the Duat, but it always needed the intact Sa, or mummy, to return to. Anubis's precision thus guaranteed that the Ba would never be lost, maintaining the crucial reunion of body and spirit. This intimate connection to the Ka explains why offerings, food, drink, and personal items were so critical, as they were necessary to feed and sustain the Ka in the tomb, and Anubis, as the lord of the tomb, was the ultimate guardian of these provisions, ensuring the deceased's longevity. Therefore, Anubis functioned not just as the gatekeeper of the afterlife, but as the divine technician of permanence, whose careful work guaranteed that the delicate and complex relationship between the body, the Ka, and the Ba remained intact for all eternity. A role that superseded even the judgment of Osiris in terms of daily practical necessity for the soul's survival. His power, at its heart, was the power to arrest time and decay, transforming mortal flesh into an enduring vessel for the spirit.
Anubis's power is not just described in Egyptian mythology, it is enacted through his pervasive voice and specific instructions found within the vast body of funerary literature, particularly the various compositions now known as the Book of the Dead. These texts often present Anubis not as a distant god, but as an active, guiding presence who addresses the deceased directly, offering crucial advice and powerful incantations necessary to navigate the Duat's perils. For instance, specific spells are attributed to Anubis to help the deceased prevent the heart from being stolen, or repel the serpent Apep, providing the soul with the divine language and knowledge needed for self-defense. This literary role establishes Anubis as the divine educator who equips the soul for its final journey, contrasting with the often silent, majestic presence of Osiris. The detailed instructions he provides serve as a narrative device that simultaneously consoles the living by providing them with a concrete ritual action and empowers the dead by giving them the divine password to unlock eternal life. Furthermore, Anubis's name appears frequently in the sarcophagi and tomb inscriptions, often alongside the deceased's own plea for offerings, and these inscriptions transform the tomb walls into eternal contracts, where Anubis is invoked as the divine witness and enforcer of the deceased's rights to receive perpetual sustenance from their descendants. This active vocal presence in the literature and on the walls confirms that Anubis was the god of practical application, whose mastery of magic and ritual protocol was the most critical factor in guaranteeing the successful transition from mortal life to spiritual Akh, transfigured spirit. His power was the power of divine literacy, granting the deceased the necessary text and voice to speak their truth to the gods.
The enduring popularity of Anubis truly shone during the Hellenistic and Roman periods, demonstrating his theological adaptability as his cult merged with foreign deities, ensuring his continuity in an increasingly cosmopolitan Mediterranean world. The most significant development was the creation of Hermanubis, the syncretized deity that blended the Egyptian god with the Greek Hermes. Hermes, as the Greek psychopomp, guide of souls, and a messenger of the gods, shared Anubis's essential function of guiding souls between realms, making the fusion natural and powerful. Hermanubis was widely worshipped in Roman Egypt, and his cult spread into the imperial capital itself, offering Roman citizens a god who promised a structured, ritualized path to the afterlife, something often lacking in traditional Roman religion. Unlike the earlier Egyptian period, where Anubis was often depicted simply as a jackal, the Hermanubis figure was invariably shown with a distinct human body dressed in Greek or Roman attire and topped with the characteristic jackal head, often holding the caduceus, Hermes staff, and the palm branch of victory. This Greco-Roman evolution shifted the emphasis slightly, moving Anubis from the meticulous embalmer focused on the body's integrity to the universal mystical guide focused on the soul's journey, aligning his duties with those of the esoteric Hellenistic cults that emphasized hidden knowledge and sacred initiation. The adoption of Anubis by the Greeks and Romans is a profound testament to the power of his original concept, the belief that a powerful, impartial, and faithful guardian is required at the very moment of death proved to be a universal human spiritual need that transcended language, culture, and the rise and fall of empires, cementing his legacy not just as an Egyptian deity, but as a figure of eternal spiritual significance across the ancient world.
Anubis's ultimate power is fundamentally eschatological, dealing with the final events of destiny, as his precise management of the soul's transition guarantees the cyclical renewal of the cosmos itself, a power that directly supports the eternal kingship of Osiris. The Egyptians believed that if the dead were not properly prepared, judged, and integrated into the Duat, cosmic order, or Mot, would break down, leading to the collapse of the universe. By meticulously performing the embalming, Anubis ensures that the potential chaos of physical decay is transformed into the stillness and stability of the mummy, which acts as a spiritual anchor for the entire world. His authority at the scales ensures that the cosmic balance between Ma'at and Isfet is maintained, guaranteeing that the universe continues its predictable, ordered cycles. Without Anubis's exactitude, chaos would consume the realm of the dead, paralyzing the powers of Osiris and stopping the regenerative journey of Ra. Therefore, Anubis functions as the divine mechanic of the cosmos, whose rituals prevent the end of the world by ensuring that every deceased soul correctly plays its part in the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. This essential role makes him the quiet, powerful partner of both the sun god and the king of the dead. Ra depends on him to clear the path for the sun's daily ascent, and Osiris depends on him to deliver pure, justly judged citizens to his kingdom. Thus, the jackal god, often seen only in the gloomy context of tombs and silence, is paradoxically the god of new beginnings, the silent force whose eternal vigil ensures the universe will dawn anew tomorrow, perpetually maintaining the Egyptian belief in an ordered, endless afterlife.
The complex and often overlooked relationship between Anubis and his mother, Nephthys, adds a profound layer of nuance to his loyalty to Osiris, positioning him as a figure who chose order and duty over the chaotic influence of his familial origins. Nephthys, the sister of Isis and Osiris, was married to the destructive god Set, yet she consistently showed kindness and loyalty to her sister Isis, particularly during Isis's search for the dismembered body of Osiris. In the tradition where Anubis is the son of Osiris and Nephthys, through her disguise as Isis, Nephthys's act of concealing and later abandoning the child was driven by fear of Set's jealousy, and it was Isis who subsequently found and raised Anubis, making him eternally loyal to the Osirian cause. This dynamic, being born of the house of chaos, Set and Nephthys, but raised and loyal to the house of order, Osiris and Isis, positions Anubis as the ultimate redeemed figure within the pantheon, whose lineage gives him unique insight into the methods of both Isfet and Ma'at. Nephthys herself was a goddess strongly associated with mourning, protection, and funerary lamentation, and her presence was often invoked alongside Anubis during the ritualistic preparation of the body, where she was seen as aiding her son in the sacred duty of healing and restoration. In the funeral rites, the roles of Isis and Nephthys were often performed by two women who would symbolically weep and lament over the deceased, mirroring the two goddesses' sorrow over Osiris, and Anubis would preside over these rites, using the divine sorrow to imbue the mummy with spiritual protection. This dynamic, being born of the house of chaos, Set and Nephthys, but raised and loyal to the house of order, Osiris and Isis, showcases that Anubis's power is not solitary, but is strengthened by the combined loyalty, protection, and sorrow of the entire Osirian family, making him the loyal lieutenant who successfully bridged the internal political tensions of the great divine family.
Anubis's enduring power and trustworthiness stemmed from his fundamental adherence to impartiality, a defining characteristic that ensured the Egyptian system of divine justice was perceived as utterly fair, devoid of the personal biases and vendettas that plagued the other gods, particularly Set. While many deities, like Thoth, served important roles in the tribunal, Anubis was the only god who had been personally involved in the events that created the Duat, the embalming of Osiris, and yet stood entirely apart from the political and personal rivalries of the gods when presiding over the scales. His technical precision and focus on the purity of the heart meant that the judgment was based solely on the moral weight of the deceased's actions during their earthly life, guaranteeing that neither wealth, status, nor royal favor could sway the balance. This rejection of personal bias made him the ideal executor of Ma'at, a necessary contrast to Set, whose actions were driven purely by envy and chaos. The deceased, in their prayers to Anubis, consistently appealed to his renowned fairness, trusting him to correctly measure their life against the feather. This trust placed immense power in Anubis's hands. If he declared the heart pure, the gods could not dispute it, and if he allowed Ammit to devour it, there was no appeal. Therefore, Anubis was the god who guaranteed the transparency of the divine process, providing the crucial ethical foundation upon which the entire Egyptian belief system rested. His impartiality was not a sign of coldness, but a testament to his supreme adherence to divine law, making him the silent, faithful pillar of justice in a cosmos often threatened by disorder.
Although Anubis remained a universally recognized symbol, the shift in his mythological importance became virtually complete by the time of the New Kingdom, from around 1550 to 1070 BCE, as the cult of Osiris ascended to unparalleled dominance, consolidating most of the afterlife functions under the King of the Dead. This historical evolution saw Anubis's epithet as foremost of the Westerners fully and permanently ceded to Osiris, formally repositioning Anubis from the supreme god of the dead to the faithful, indispensable vizier and technician. This consolidation was driven by the desire to streamline the afterlife narrative and emphasize the promise of resurrection, which was Osiris's core power, over the technical complexities of decay and burial, which were Anubis's original domain. While Anubis never disappeared, his function became rigidly specialized, focused almost exclusively on the embalming tent and the scales, rather than the ultimate sovereignty of the Duat. The funerary texts and art of the New Kingdom reflect this change. Osiris is consistently enthroned as the judge, while Anubis stands next to the balance, carrying out the mechanics of the trial. However, this shift did not diminish his necessity. Instead, it highlighted his supreme loyalty and technical mastery, demonstrating that the New World Order depended entirely on the old god's faithful service. The final decline in his active worship came, as previously noted, with the arrival of Christianity, which replaced the physical concern for the body with a focus on the incorporeal soul. Nevertheless, the image of Anubis, the vigilant, impartial guardian, forever standing between the living and the dead, ensuring that order prevails over chaos, has cemented his place as the eternal sentinel of the Egyptian soul, a figure who, though no longer the king, remains the most essential figure in the entire journey beyond the horizon.
Anubis's power structure was unique because it was fundamentally symbiotic, creating a crucial interdependence between the god and the living family of the deceased, whose faithful actions sustained his role and authority on earth. The Egyptians believed that Anubis's protection was conditional upon the continuous fulfillment of the cult of the dead, which required the living family to perform regular rituals, recite the correct prayers, and, most importantly, provide offerings of food and drink to the deceased's ka in the tomb. If the living neglected these duties, the ka would starve, the mummy would cease to be a stable vessel, and the entire afterlife passage would be jeopardized. Anubis, as the lord of the necropolis and the guardian of the ka, was the divine enforcer of this compact. The fear of provoking Anubis's displeasure, and thus inviting the chaos of neglect and destruction into the tomb, was a powerful motivator for the living to maintain their ritual obligations across generations. The system ensured that the transition to the afterlife was not a one-time event, but an ongoing, communal effort, with Anubis at its center, demanding perpetual respect and remembrance. His power thus derived, in part, from his ability to influence the behavior of the living through the threat of posthumous spiritual starvation, cementing his status as a god whose domain bridged both the realm of the dead and the ethical duties of the living. This dynamic underscores that while Anubis granted eternal life required the sustained, vigilant action of the living, making his relationship with humanity an unbreakable contract of mutual necessity and respect.
The deep historical roots of Anubis can be traced directly back to the very meaning of his Egyptian name, Inpu or Anpu,
the etymology of which provides further insight into his original primal functions before the Osirian Revolution. While the precise meaning of Inpu is debated by modern Egyptologists, one prominent theory links the name to the root imp, which means to decay or to rot, suggesting that his earliest designation was simply the one of decay or the master of decomposition. This original, grim name reflects his earliest, most primal function to govern and master the physical processes of death and putrefaction that naturally occurred to the body after burial in the desert. The Egyptians, through Anubis, sought to control this inevitable physical chaos by deifying it, transforming the raw process of decay into the highly ritualized, ordered procedure of mummification. By controlling decay, Anubis effectively neutralized its destructive power. Another possible etymological link connects Inpu to the word for royal child, particularly in relation to the myth where he is the abandoned child of Nephthys and Osiris, linking him directly to the royal legitimacy he later defends. However, the connection to decay is the most compelling, as it perfectly aligns with his earliest known cult center, Sinopolis, and his role in the pre-Osirian funerary texts. This linguistic analysis confirms that Anubis was initially an elemental force of nature, tamed by ritual, and later integrated into the complex solar and Osirian cycles, making his evolution a theological journey from the raw, inevitable reality of decomposition to the perfected, eternal order of the afterlife. His name itself carries the historical weight of his transformation from a primal, fierce god of the tomb to the refined, ethical guardian of the scales.
The evolving iconography of Anubis across the millennia provides a clear visual narrative of his theological transition, particularly the contrast between his imagery in the Old Kingdom and the New Kingdom. In the Old Kingdom, before Osiris's dominance, Anubis was often depicted almost exclusively in his full jackal form, a powerful black-furred sentinel standing over the mastabas, tombs, often guarding the offering niche or protecting the cemetery from the mountain. This imagery emphasized his primal power, his connection to the wild, and his solitary, supreme authority over the dead and the act of burial itself. This primal jackal conveyed an image of fierce, unquestionable control over the processes of nature and death. However, by the time of the New Kingdom and throughout the later Greco-Roman period, the common depiction shifted overwhelmingly to the anthropomorphic form, the man with the jackal head. This shift was functional and symbolic. The human body was necessary to show him performing the complex, ritualistic actions required by the Osirian faith, such as carefully supporting the scales, meticulously wrapping the mummy, or leading the deceased by the hand. The human form visually communicated his role as a meticulous priest, guide, and ritualist, rather than just a fierce guardian. The preservation of the jackal head, however, was crucial, as it retained his ancient, elemental power and his unique ability to traverse the boundaries between the worlds, cementing his identity as the indispensable executor of the divine law. Therefore, the visual evolution of Anubis reflects the entire trajectory of Egyptian religion, a movement from the primal, elemental control of death toward the detailed, ethical, and ritualized promise of resurrection, with Anubis serving as the constant, essential link between the two eras. Anubis, his association with magic and the ritual of the opening of the mouth. Anubis was not simply a god of embalming and judgment. He was intrinsically linked to funerary magic and the most critical revitalization ritual, the opening of the mouth ceremony, which harnessed divine power to ensure the deceased's spiritual resurrection. This ceremony was typically performed just before the body was sealed in the tomb, using ritual tools including the adze and special implements for sensing to symbolically touch the eyes, nose, and mouth of the mummy or the sarcophagus, thereby restoring the deceased's senses so they could breathe, speak, eat, and see in the afterlife. Anubis presided over this ceremony, and the chief priest, wearing the jackal mask, performed the actions in his name, channeling the god's specific magical authority over the integrity of the body. The ritual was itself an act of divine alchemy, transforming an inert corpse into a spiritually functional being, Ak, and Anubis's presence guaranteed that the magical transference of life force was successful and permanent. Furthermore, Anubis's power over magic was frequently invoked in protective spells found on amulets and bandages. He was believed to know the true, hidden names of the chaotic demons of the Duat, and knowing a demon's true name gave the speaker absolute power over it. By sharing this esoteric knowledge with the deceased, Anubis reinforced his role as the ultimate protector and guide, providing the soul not only with physical preparation, but also with the indispensable magical tools required to silence their enemies and successfully navigate the darkest corners of the underworld, confirming that his authority covered every possible threat, physical, ethical, and supernatural.
The essential function of Anubis was inextricably linked to the powerful role of scent and the use of the sacred oils and resins that were paramount to the mummification process, giving him a unique sensorial domain within the pantheon. The jackal god, with his superior sense of smell, was the natural divine master of odors. This ability allowed him to quickly locate the deceased in the desert, and, more importantly, to identify and govern the powerful aromatic materials used in the embalming tent. The most famous of these materials were the fragrant oils and resins like frankincense, myrrh, and cedar oil, which were considered divine secretions and were applied meticulously to preserve the flesh, mask the odors of decay, and symbolically transform the body. Anubis's epithet, "he who is in the place of embalming," referred directly to the aromatic, sealed environment of the Ibu, purification tent, which was filled with the scents of these divine materials. These sacred oils were not merely preservatives. They were believed to be imbued with magical properties necessary to make the corpse spiritually acceptable to the gods and suitable for the Ba and Ka to return. By overseeing the application of these resins, Anubis became the guarantor of the body's sanctity, ensuring that the deceased smelled not of mortal decay, but of divine permanence and aromatic purity. This deep association with scent distinguishes Anubis, making him the silent olfactory anchor of the entire afterlife ritual, where the success of the transition was judged not only by sight and deed, but also by the powerful, fragrant presence of eternal life. Anubis's powerful and resonant image has ensured his survival as a potent archetype in modern psychology and popular culture, representing the universal human need for guidance and assurance in the face of death and the unknown. Psychologically, Anubis functions as the shadow guide, the figure who understands the darkness and chaos of mortality, but uses that knowledge to facilitate safe passage, much like a therapist, guiding an individual through the painful, messy processes of internal change or grief. He embodies the principle that transformation often requires confronting the unpleasant realities of decay, loss, and the metaphorical wilderness, which his jackal form perfectly represents. In this modern interpretation, the weighing of the heart transcends a simple religious judgment to become a metaphor for self-assessment and moral reckoning, where the individual must face the true weight of their life choices against the standard of truth, the feather of Ma'at, without self-deception. Anubis's impartial precision at the scales thus speaks to the modern desire for objective justice, free from human corruption. Furthermore, his steadfast loyalty to Osiris, despite his own chaotic origins, provides an archetype of redemption and duty, showing that one's destiny is defined not by birth, but by one's ethical allegiance.
His continued presence in video games, literature, and film reflects the enduring human fascination with the threshold of existence, confirming that the silent, watchful sentinel who knows the secrets of the dark remains an essential figure for navigating the greatest mystery of all: what lies beyond the final breath.
The contrast between Anubis, the sacred jackal god, and the popular cat goddess Bastet provides a fascinating insight into the duality of Egyptian religious thought regarding domestic and wild animals and their respective domains of order and chaos. While Bastet, often depicted as a cat or lioness, was the goddess of the home, fertility, joy, music, and the protection of the pharaoh's house and city, her power was essentially focused on the living and the interior civilized space. The cat was a treasured domestic animal, symbolizing warmth, comfort, and the defense of the hearth against pests, aligning her with the bright, visible order of the sun. Anubis, conversely, was the god of the wild, exterior space, the dry, chaotic desert edge where the dead were buried, and his jackal form symbolized the necessary negotiation with the destructive forces of nature and the solitude of the wilderness. Bastet's domain ended at the walls of the city. Anubis's domain began where civilization ceased. Yet both deities functioned as crucial protectors. Bastet guarded the living from disease and misfortune, while Anubis guarded the dead from destruction and spiritual collapse, demonstrating that the maintenance of cosmic order, ma'at, required specialized divine guardians for every aspect of existence, from the cozy household to the lonely tomb. The necessary ritualistic presence of the terrifying wild dog god at the moment of death was a solemn counterbalance to the everyday accessible joy provided by the cat goddess, confirming that Egyptian spirituality required both the fierce external sentinel and the gentle internal protector to ensure harmony between life and death. Anubis's power was not abstract. It was physically and geographically manifested through the architectural design and placement of the Egyptian necropolises, which were literally built to function as his domain. The ancient burial grounds were almost universally situated on the western bank of the Nile, the side where the sun set and symbolically entered the Duat, and always located on the arid, chaotic desert edge, deliberately distanced from the fertile land of the living, which ensured that the dead resided squarely in the realm of the jackal god. The long causeways and processional routes leading from the fertile land to the tombs were often guarded by rows of jackal statues, which were intended to represent Anubis and his subordinate jackal deities, visually reinforcing that visitors were entering his sanctified territory. The very structure of the tombs, particularly the subterranean burial chambers and corridors, were also under Anubis's protection, as he was believed to know every secret passage and hidden trap, a knowledge essential for guarding against tomb robbers who were seen as agents of Isfet, or chaos. Furthermore, the embalming workshop, Ibu or Wabet, often a temporary structure near the tomb, was considered sacred space under his direct patronage, and its temporary, isolated nature on the desert edge further emphasized Anubis's command over the necessary transitional space between life and eternity. Thus, the entire geography of Egyptian death, from the position of the sun to the placement of the offering table, was organized as a physical homage to Anubis, confirming that his authority was a practical, tangible reality that dictated the urban and religious planning of ancient Egypt.
A curious aspect of Anubis's theology is his almost complete absence from the major Egyptian creation myths, which typically focus on the sun god Ra, the primordial waters of Nun, or the creation of the Ennead. This omission is highly significant, as it underscores that Anubis's power is inherently focused on finality, transition, and the maintenance of order after life has been established, rather than the initial act of creation. His domain is the end state, the perfection and preservation of what has already been brought into being, and his loyalty lies with the resurrected order, Osiris, not the original volatile forces of the void.
This theological focus on the post-creation world distinguishes him from the foundational gods and makes his presence unique. He is the indispensable god of the second chance, the one who guarantees that creation, once achieved, is not lost to chaos or decay. The myth of his birth, whether by Ra or Osiris, always occurs well after the initial world-forming events, cementing his status as a god of the consequential middle and end stages of existence. His power is therefore one of maintenance and integrity, ensuring that the divine blueprint of the cosmos is successfully carried through the ultimate test of mortality. By focusing on the absolute preservation of the Sa, mummy, and the ethical perfection of the Ib, heart, Anubis's entire power structure serves as a necessary spiritual check against the inevitable entropic forces that perpetually threaten the order brought forth by the creation gods. Anubis's sustained presence in the global consciousness, far removed from the geographical and religious context of the Nile Valley, speaks volumes about his power as a universally resonant archetype of passage and truth. Unlike many other specialized deities, whose functions have become obscure, Anubis's role as the guide and impartial judge is immediately comprehensible across cultures, appealing directly to the fundamental human preoccupation with mortality and legacy. In modern interpretations, from historical documentaries to fantasy media, Anubis is often depicted not merely as a mythological figure, but as the embodiment of cosmic law and emotional closure. His jackal form, representing the necessary confrontation with the dark and the unknown, resonates with the psychological process of confronting grief and accepting finality. Moreover, the symbolic power of the scales of Mot that he presides over has been widely adopted in popular culture as the ultimate, incorruptible standard of justice, far surpassing the visibility of other Egyptian legal deities. This enduring appeal confirms that Anubis functions as a powerful metaphor for accountability. The knowledge that a powerful, unbiased entity will ultimately weigh one's life choices provides a sense of order in a chaotic world. Thus, the longevity of Anubis's image, from the dusty sarcophagi of the Old Kingdom to the digitally rendered tombs of modern gaming, is a testament to his singular theological genius, the successful merging of the fierce, primal guardian of the grave with the gentle, faithful guide of the soul, providing eternal assurance that the transition from darkness to light will be managed with technical perfection and moral integrity.
The extensive historical record confirms that the cult surrounding Anubis was highly organized, featuring a distinct priesthood whose functions were rigidly specialized and whose work was considered indispensable to the security of the Egyptian state. Demonstrating that his worship was more than mere mythology, it was a crucial piece of the state's infrastructure. These priests were known by titles such as Hem-Neger-Anpu, servant of the god Anubis, and were primarily responsible for the execution of the funerary rites, acting as the god's agents in the embalming tent and ensuring that the complex ritual protocols were followed precisely. The highest-ranking embalming priests were often referred to as Keri Hebet, lector priests, and were master ritualists who possessed the necessary esoteric knowledge and magical incantations to guarantee the body's transformation. Archaeological findings, particularly from the necropolises, often include stelae and monuments dedicated by these priests, affirming their pride in their sacred work and their direct, specialized communication with the jackal god. The existence of these specialized functionaries underscores the serious, state-level importance of Anubis's domain, ensuring the successful passage of the dead was viewed not just as a religious necessity, but as a matter of national security, as the stability of the living world was believed to be dependent on the tranquility of the dead. This highly bureaucratic and specialized priesthood stands as a concrete historical confirmation that Anubis was a working god whose power was constantly being invoked and applied, making him one of the most practically relevant deities in the entire Egyptian pantheon, requiring a sophisticated human organization to maintain his divine mandate.
During the later periods of Egyptian history, particularly the Ptolemaic and Roman eras,
Anubis's cult played a significant role in the integration of foreigners into the Egyptian religious system, proving that his power was not limited by nationality or ethnicity. As Egypt became a hub of Mediterranean trade and cultural exchange, many Greeks, Romans, and other foreigners chose to live and die in the Nile Valley. These newcomers were often drawn to the Egyptian promise of eternal life, which contrasted with the vague or grim underworlds of their own mythologies. The cult of Anubis, particularly in its syncretic form as Hermanubis, served as the perfect gateway, offering a recognizable figure, the guide of souls, combined with the reassuring Egyptian precision of the afterlife process. Foreigners who adopted Egyptian funerary practices saw Anubis as their guardian, trusting his impartiality to weigh their non-Egyptian hearts fairly against the feather of Maat. This universalizing function cemented Anubis's status as a cosmopolitan deity, a god whose authority was accepted by all who died on Egyptian soil, regardless of their origin. His ability to transcend national boundaries and integrate with foreign religious concepts ensured that the Egyptian belief system remained vibrant and relevant long after its pharaonic government had fallen, cementing Anubis's legacy as the most accessible and transcultural figure of Egyptian death. His power, therefore, lay not only in his ancient pedigree, but in his modern adaptability to serve the spiritual needs of an evolving multicultural world. Anubis's power reached its most absolute peak in the final moment of the judgment, the declaration of the verdict following the weighing of the heart, a decision that was instantaneous, unappealable, and governed by the unyielding law of the scales of Maat. Once the jackal god adjusted the balance, the resulting state, either lighter than the feather, pure, or heavier, sinful, was the definitive final judgment on the soul's worth, and Anubis's role was to immediately execute the consequences. If the heart was pure, Anubis formally led the soul forward to Osiris and the eternal joys of the field of reeds, Audu. However, if the heart was found to be heavy, Anubis's duty transformed grimly into that of the executioner, as he was the one who delivered the condemned heart to the terrifying goddess Ammit, who would instantly devour it, condemning the soul to the second death, a final absolute cessation of existence and the erasure of one's identity. This moment reveals the stark dual nature of Anubis's power. He is simultaneously the guide to paradise and the agent of annihilation. His unwavering execution of the verdict, regardless of the consequences, confirms his supreme loyalty to the abstract principle of Maat over any sentiment or personal bias. This final act of unyielding judgment cemented his reputation as the ultimate guarantor of truth and the cornerstone of the Egyptian moral universe, demonstrating that his power was not merely one of ritual care, but the absolute power over final spiritual destiny.
Anubis's use of the jackal form was essential to his function because it represented the civilized world's necessary negotiation with the untamed wilderness, the dangerous, chaotic edge of the desert that perpetually threatened the fertile, ordered lands of the Nile Valley. In Egyptian thought, the wilderness was the domain of Isfet, chaos, where predatory animals and demons resided, and where the dead, if not properly protected, would be subject to destruction. Anubis, by adopting the form of the animal that mastered this wilderness, effectively tamed chaos with chaos, turning a creature of the outside world into the ultimate insider of the tomb. His superior knowledge of the desert landscape and the habits of its scavengers allowed him to stand as the perfect counterforce to natural decay. He was the divine paradox, the fierce, wild dog who used his feral strength and instincts to defend the very order, the mummy, that his animal counterpart would naturally destroy. This symbolic negotiation meant that Anubis's power was constantly being applied. Every night, in every necropolis, the jackal god had to physically and magically patrol the boundaries of the tomb, repelling both real-world scavengers and spiritual manifestations of chaos sent by Set.
This constant, active defense of the boundary cemented Anubis's reputation as the indispensable physical guarantor of the afterlife, whose power was rooted in his ability to command the forces of the wilderness itself for the preservation of human order. Anubis's influence was not confined to the embalming tent or the Hall of Two Truths. He played a crucial liturgical role in the grand funerary procession, visually and symbolically bridging the gap between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The procession, which carried the mummy from the embalming place to the tomb, was a public spectacle of transformation, and the chief mourner or priest wearing the jackal mask would lead the entire cortege, ensuring the route was sanctified and protected by Anubis's presence. This act physically brought the god's authority into the public sphere, emphasizing the state-level importance of the transition. Furthermore, while Osiris was often associated with the celestial bark of Ra, Anubis was frequently invoked to guide the deceased's funerary boat across the Nile or across the metaphorical waters of the Duat, acting as the divine pilot who navigated the perilous currents of the afterlife. This maritime role highlighted his supreme mastery over all transitional zones, whether they were the desert, the swamp, or the river. The presence of Anubis, both physically in the procession and symbolically on the boat, transformed a simple journey into a sacred ritual, ensuring that every step of the deceased's final movement was under the strict watchful protection of the god who knew the way, reaffirming his supreme status as the indispensable master of transition and protocol.
Anubis's meticulous ritual work was ultimately aimed at creating the Akh, the transfigured, effective, and glorious spirit, the final, complete form of the deceased, which required the successful reconciliation and stabilization of the body, the Ba, soul or personality, and the Ka, life force. The Ba with the mobile component, the spirit that traveled to the Duat for judgment and returned to the tomb. The Ka was the life force that required the physical mummy to remain intact for subsistence. Anubis's embalming guaranteed the physical foundation of the mummy, ensuring the Ka had a home and the Ba a destination. However, the final state of Akh was achieved only after the successful weighing of the heart by Anubis and the subsequent acceptance by Osiris. Anubis's judicial precision was thus the final catalyst that transformed the separation.
Anubis's meticulous ritual work was ultimately aimed at creating the Akh, the transfigured, effective, and glorious spirit, the final, complete form of the deceased, which required the successful reconciliation and stabilization of the body, the Ba, soul or personality, and the Ka, life force. The Ba was the mobile component, the spirit that traveled to the Duat for judgment and returned to the tomb. The Ka was the life force that required the physical mummy to remain intact for subsistence. Anubis's embalming guaranteed the physical foundation of the mummy, ensuring that the Ka had a home and the Ba a destination. However, the final state of Akh was achieved only after the successful weighing of the heart by Anubis and the subsequent acceptance by Osiris. Anubis's judicial precision was thus the final catalyst that transformed the separated spiritual elements into a cohesive, eternal whole. The Akh was the spiritual result of Anubis's technical mastery and ethical scrutiny, proving that the silent, detailed work of the jackal god was not merely preparatory, but absolutely essential for the soul's ultimate spiritual evolution. Without the order provided by Anubis at every step, the Ba would wander lost, the Ka would dissipate, and the final, glorious Akh would never be born. Anubis's authority over the process of death was inherently linked to the concept of purification and the rigorous ritual cleansing required at every stage of the funerary process, a necessary step to transform the corruptible human body into a vessel fit for eternal divinity. The first stage of embalming took place in the Ibu, the purification tent,
where the body was washed with sacred waters from the Nile and wine before the complex internal work began. Anubis, as the patron of this tent, was the divine force that sanctioned this purification, ensuring that both physical impurities and ritual pollution were removed. This cleansing was theological, preparing the body not just for preservation, but for its eventual audience with the divine tribunal of Osiris. Furthermore, the priests who served Anubis were required to observe strict protocols of purity, often shaving their heads and bodies and wearing only white linen, ensuring that the agents who touched the dead body were ritually impeccable. The very nature of the black resins used in mummification, which Anubis's color symbolized, were seen as agents of profound purification, sealing the body against all corruption. Thus, Anubis was the deity of absolute ritual sanitation, whose power guaranteed that the messy, frightening reality of decomposition was transformed into a clean, ordered, and sacred transition, securing the spiritual integrity required for rebirth.
In the most compassionate and final interpretation of his role, Anubis acted as the ultimate intercessor for the justified soul, making the final claim on behalf of the deceased to enter the eternal paradise known as the Field of Reeds, Aru, the heavenly realm ruled by Osiris. Having successfully guided the soul through the Duat and secured the positive verdict at the scales, Anubis would formally present the purified spirit to Osiris. This act was not a mere introduction. It was a powerful divine certification where Anubis vouched for the soul's moral integrity and ritual completeness, asserting that all necessary steps, from the embalming to the final confession, had been flawlessly executed under his authority. By giving this final testimony, Anubis symbolically transferred the justified soul from his domain, the process of death, to Osiris's domain, the process of eternal life. This final intercession underscores the profound trust placed in the jackal god by the entire pantheon, confirming that Anubis's word was considered absolute proof of the soul's worthiness. Thus, the power dynamic with Osiris concluded with Anubis delivering the perfected product, the ethically flawless, ritually complete spirit, to the king of the dead, ensuring that the eternal kingship of Osiris was continuously stocked with worthy citizens, a final act of service that cemented Anubis's status as the indispensable partner in the realization of the Egyptian promise of eternal bliss. Anubis's power can be concisely summarized by charting his dominance across the four major eras of Egyptian theological development, illustrating his resilience and adaptability. In the Old Kingdom, he reigned as the supreme god of the dead, the fierce, solitary jackal master of burial and decomposition. With the rise of the Middle Kingdom, he was seamlessly integrated into the Osirian mythos, becoming the divine embalmer and technician, the indispensable servant who restored Osiris and codified the process of mummification. During the New Kingdom and the height of the empire, his role solidified into that of the impartial guide and judge, primarily serving as the vigilant presiding authority over the scales of Maat, guaranteeing ethical accountability for the entire population. Finally, in the Greco-Roman period, his power transcended cultural and geographic boundaries, transforming him into Hermanubis, the universal psychopomp, a guide accessible to all foreigners seeking the Egyptian promise of an ordered afterlife. This continuous evolution confirms that Anubis was a flexible, yet essential deity, whose core function, the transition and preservation of the soul, was so vital that he adapted to every political and religious shift, securing his status as the eternal sentinel of the dead, whose authority was necessary to maintain order in the cosmos, making him the silent, enduring foundation upon which the entire Egyptian spiritual world rested.
Anubis's power operates on a unique dual axis, simultaneously focusing on the most minute personal details of the deceased's body and the vast cosmological necessity of maintaining universal order,
a contrast that defines his theological significance. On the personal level, his power is demonstrated by his meticulous care over the internal organs, the proper sealing of the canopic jars, and the precise wrapping of the linen bandages, an intensely private and detailed ritual. This focus on the individual is what gave the Egyptian people such profound comfort. Conversely, this personal ritual work has massive cosmological consequences. The integrity of the mummy is directly tied to the stability of the Ka, the successful transition of the Ba, and ultimately the ability of Osiris to reign and Ra to be reborn daily. Thus, the silent, careful application of resin by the jackal-masked priest in the secluded embalming tent is, in the grand scheme, an act of cosmic maintenance, ensuring the stability of the entire universe. This duality, the intimate guardian of the flesh and the enforcer of celestial law, makes Anubis a singular figure whose every action links the fragile reality of human mortality directly to the magnificent eternal cycles of the gods, solidifying his role as the necessary spiritual intermediary between the microcosm of the body and the macrocosm of the cosmos.
While primarily associated with the nocturnal Duat, the jackal form of Anubis sometimes found a subtle place in Egyptian astronomical myth and the interpretation of celestial events, particularly those involving the temporary obscuring of the sun, which were terrifying moments of cosmic vulnerability. The Egyptians viewed a solar eclipse as an event where the chaos serpent, Apep, temporarily gained the upper hand over the sun god Ra, threatening to plunge the world into darkness and destroy Maat. In some localized traditions, the jackal, as the master of the night and the wilderness, was invoked as a necessary, fierce defender during these moments of solar weakness. Anubis's power was believed to be capable of tracking and driving away the chaotic forces that preyed upon the sun, just as he drove scavengers from the tombs. This association leveraged his unique duality. The god of the darkness was needed to restore the light. His black color, symbolizing the void and the rich black earth of rebirth, placed him in direct command of the forces that bordered the light, making him the ideal guardian against the temporary intrusion of chaos. This subtle astronomical role underscores the belief that Anubis's guardianship was not confined to the earthly necropolis, but extended to the very edges of the cosmos, where the forces of order and chaos perpetually battled for control of the heavens and the fate of the world. The power of Anubis was physically channeled through the very tools and materials used by the embalmers, making the items themselves sacred extensions of his divine authority. The sacred linens used to wrap the mummy were often inscribed with spells and protective imagery under Anubis's patronage, transforming simple cloth into a magical shield against decay and spiritual harm. The long 70-day process required specialized instruments, the obsidian blades for incisions, the long probes for excising the brain, a process called netry, and the various containers for natron. And these tools, used by priests wearing the jackal mask, became imbued with Anubis's essence, ensuring the technical work was flawless. Even the natron salt, the drying agent essential for preservation, was considered a divine substance under his guidance. This focus on the tools emphasizes the technological aspect of his divinity. Anubis was the god of applied science and meticulous craft, whose power was physically manifested through the perfection of human skill and sacred knowledge. The preservation of the body, which was the central promise of the Egyptian faith, was ultimately guaranteed by the technical precision overseen by Anubis, confirming that his authority covered every single object used to transform mortal decay into eternal stability.
Anubis's most terrifying power resides in his authority over the second death, the ultimate spiritual annihilation that awaited the unrighteous, a concept that underscores the high stakes of the afterlife trial. For the Egyptians, the loss of one's body, Ba, and Ka was considered the true finality, the complete erasure of one's identity from the cosmos, a fate far worse than any underworld punishment. Anubis, as the executor who delivered the failed heart to Ammit, the devourer, held the keys to this ultimate negation of existence. This power to inflict spiritual oblivion meant that Anubis was the most feared yet most respected deity in the entire judgment process. His function was not to torture or imprison, but to determine whether a soul was worthy of continued existence. This role as the gateway to annihilation ensures that his impartiality is absolute and terrifying, as the consequence of failure is irreversible. The simple act of tipping the scales was the ultimate exercise of power, a silent, final verdict that dictated whether the soul would ascend to the blissful field of reeds or be eternally erased from the memory of the gods and men, solidifying Anubis's status as the final, unchallengeable authority over spiritual destiny. Anubis's influence culminates in the final, ritualistic closing of the tomb, the moment when the body is sealed and the living formally separate from the dead, an act over which he presides as the supreme master of the threshold. Once the sarcophagus was placed in the burial chamber and the funerary goods arranged, the final sealing of the tomb's entrance was done under the protective sanction of Anubis, often marked by the placement of a clay seal bearing the imprint of the jackal god or his symbol, the 9 bows, representing Egypt's conquered enemies. This seal was both physical and magical, serving as an immutable contract between the living and the dead, guaranteeing that the interior space was now strictly the domain of Anubis and the deceased, inviolable to intruders. The famous intact seal of the jackal god found on the doors of King Tutankhamun's burial chamber is the most potent historical evidence of this final protective act. The priest who performed the sealing ceremony acted as Anubis's agent, ensuring that the mummy was safe from both human robbers and spiritual threats, like Set's demons. This final act transforms the tomb from a temporary house for the dead into a permanent spiritual fortress, with Anubis as the eternal vigilant watchman who holds the keys to the boundary, ensuring that the living remains separate from the dead and that the Ankh can pursue its eternal destiny undisturbed.
The theological framework surrounding Anubis is further clarified by his conceptual counterpoint in the sacred scarab beetle, Khepri, creating a symbiotic pair that governs the entirety of the transition from death to rebirth. Khepri, often depicted rolling the sun disk across the sky, was the god of self-creation, perpetual motion, and the morning sun, embodying the concept of the deceased rising and being renewed in the afterlife. Anubis, conversely, was the god of the stillness, stasis, and preservation of the body, embodying the necessary ritual foundation for that rebirth. Khepri represented the spiritual momentum of the soul, while Anubis represented the physical stability of the body. The power of the scarab amulet, frequently placed over the heart of the deceased, was to ensure that the heart did not testify against the soul at the final judgment, a trial overseen by Anubis. Thus, both deities worked in concert. Anubis's meticulous preparation made the body fit for Khepri's renewal, and Khepri's morning energy completed the transition begun by Anubis's nocturnal work. This pairing demonstrates the complex division of labor in the afterlife, confirming that the spiritual resurrection promised by the sun god and facilitated by Osiris could only occur if the body was first flawlessly secured and ratified by the silent, dedicated master of preservation, Anubis. Anubis's most enduring psychological power lies in his ability to imbue the terrifying, unpredictable act of death with absolute predictability and ritual order, a function essential for the spiritual well-being of the Egyptian population. The entire funerary process, from the first incision to the final sealing of the tomb, was a complex 70-day ritual prescribed by divine law and supervised by Anubis. This rigid structure eliminated spiritual randomness, guaranteeing that if the living performed their duties correctly, the dead would achieve eternity. The assurance that the soul would be guided, the body preserved, and the judgment rendered fairly, all managed by one reliable, impartial deity, provided profound comfort against the fear of the unknown. Anubis transformed death from a chaotic spiritual catastrophe into a sacred, manageable transition, where every step was foreseen and every obstacle had a corresponding magical or ritual solution.
This certainty was a powerful anchor for the Egyptian mind, demonstrating that the god of the dead was ultimately a god of structure and reassurance, ensuring that mortality, while inevitable, was not surmountable chaos, but rather the highly ordered gateway to eternal life.
Anubis, as the lord of the sacred land, commanded a hierarchical structure of subordinate, lesser deities within the necropolis, demonstrating that his power was managerial and extensive, covering every aspect of the burial grounds. Chief among his subordinates were other local jackal or dog gods, as well as minor tomb deities whose specific functions, such as guarding certain gates, delivering offerings, or protecting specific limbs on the body, were performed under Anubis's supreme authority. For example, he commanded the various canine gods and the forces that repelled grave robbers, effectively managing the security and administration of the vast desert cemeteries, which were complex, sprawling spiritual cities. The structure confirms that Anubis's power was not solely based on his personal might, but on his ability to organize and mobilize a spiritual bureaucracy necessary to maintain order in the realm of the dead. He was the CEO of the afterlife process, delegating specialized tasks to ensure that every individual deceased received the precise ritual care and protection required for their unique journey. This managerial role emphasizes his intelligence and strategic competence, making him a central figure in the practical governance of the Egyptian cosmos. The most significant and lasting testament to Anubis's power is the simple historical fact that mummies still exist, a physical reality that affirms the success of the rituals he governed. The unparalleled technical precision of Egyptian embalming, which has allowed bodies to survive for thousands of years, stands as a direct, tangible confirmation of Anubis's divine mandate and the effectiveness of his priesthood. Every preserved body is a validation of the meticulous processes over which he presided, proving that the Egyptian religious system successfully achieved its most fundamental goal, the spiritual and physical preservation of the human form against the forces of decay. This technical purity is what separated the Egyptian afterlife promise from its contemporaries. It was not a vague hope, but a scientifically and ritually guaranteed outcome, thanks entirely to the technical mastery sanctioned by the jackal card. Anubis's power, therefore, is uniquely demonstrable. He is the god whose divine success is verifiable in archaeological museums worldwide, making him the silent historical guarantor of the Egyptian promise of immortality, a legacy that requires no further theological argument than the simple presence of the mummy itself.
Anubis's system of power created a profound and necessary interplay between divine will and human ritual action, demonstrating that the god's blessings required tangible effort from mortals. The afterlife was not a gift of grace. It was a reward earned through a life of moral conduct, mont, and secured by the meticulous physical labor of the living. Anubis supplied the divine blueprint, the knowledge of how to embalm, how to guide the soul, and how to judge the heart. But human priests and families had to supply the raw materials, the 70 days of labor, and the ongoing offerings. This compact ensured that human agency was central to the divine plan, elevating the status of the embalming priest to that of a crucial spiritual collaborator. Anubis's presence validated the human effort, guaranteeing that the arduous work would not be in vain. This necessity of human action underscores a key theological point. The gods are powerful, but they are not autonomous. They depend on humanity's faithful execution of ritual to maintain cosmic order. Anubis thus functioned as the essential link who validated the human investment in eternity, ensuring that the living were actively participating in the eternal future of their loved ones and the ongoing stability of the cosmos itself. The final, often overlooked detail of Anubis's iconography, the ever-present jackal's tail, is a subtle yet powerful symbol of his eternal vigilance and his unique role as the master of the liminal space. In most depictions, the tail is long and curved or held erect, symbolizing the jackal's heightened awareness and ability to survey its domain without rest. The tail represents the part of his animal nature that is constantly alert, contrasting with the composed, still nature of the human body to which it is attached. This alertness is a visual guarantee to the deceased that their body and tomb are under ceaseless, effective watch, a constant defense against the unpredictable threats of the wilderness and chaos. The tail's presence reinforces the idea that Anubis's power never sleeps. Even when he is meticulously balancing the scales, the inherent alertness of the jackal remains, ensuring that no demonic force or thief can ever catch him unaware. This constant physical manifestation of vigilance is the ultimate source of comfort for the soul and the living family, confirming that the silent sentinel of the dead is perpetually ready to fulfill his sacred duty, making the jackal's tail the final, enduring symbol of the god's unceasing commitment to order and protection.
While his domain is the earth and the underworld, Anubis's mythology holds subtle resonance with celestial bodies, particularly the star Sirius, subdet to the Egyptians, which was the most important star in the sky, heralding the annual, life-giving flooding of the Nile. Sirius was strongly associated with the goddess Isis, and its heliacal rising was seen as the rebirth of the new year, directly tied to the themes of resurrection and renewal that underpin the Osirian myth cycle. Anubis, as the adopted son and faithful executor of Isis and Osiris, became a key figure in this celestial cycle. The successful, ordered transition of the deceased to the field of reeds, managed by Anubis, was the human reflection of the successful, ordered rebirth of the Nile and the star. The vigilance of the jackal god was thus paired with the celestial vigilance of the star, both serving as guides, Sirius for the living, announcing the life-sustaining flood, and Anubis for the dead, announcing the life-sustaining rebirth. This subtle cosmological link elevates Anubis's role from a purely chthonic god to a necessary component in the grand astronomical clockwork of Egyptian fate, confirming that his power was essential not just for the individual soul, but for the predictable eternal cycles that governed the heavens and the earth. Ultimately, Anubis is the supreme metaphor of the boundary and the power of the threshold, a theological concept that pervades every aspect of his myth and function, making him the most liminal deity in the Egyptian pantheon. He stands physically at the edge of the desert and the cultivated land, at the threshold of the tomb and the living world, and most critically, at the precise moment of transition between life and death. His dual form, part man, part jackal, is itself a liminal representation. His greatest power derives from his ability to exist in these intermediate spaces without succumbing to the chaos that defines them. He is the master of the in-between, the one who can safely navigate the undefined and perilous zone between states of being. This mastery of the threshold is why he is the ideal psychopomp and judge. He ensures that the transition is an orderly, structured passage, not a chaotic plunge. By embodying and controlling the boundary, Anubis guarantees that the two separate worlds, the world of the living and the world of the dead, remain distinct yet connected, allowing for the safe return of the Ba and the proper passage of the Ak. This power over the threshold is the core of his theological necessity, proving that the most essential divine role is held by the one who knows the darkness but guides inexorably toward the light.
In a final synthesis, the unmatched necessity of Anubis within the Egyptian cosmos is confirmed by his unique ability to perform three non-negotiable functions that underpin the entire faith: impartiality, technical flawlessness, and constant vigilance. Impartiality is his ethical contribution, ensuring the judgment by the scales of Ma'at is absolute and fair, providing the moral foundation for society. Technical flawlessness is his practical contribution,
guaranteeing the 70-day ritual of mummification successfully transforms corruptible flesh into a durable vessel for the spirit, making resurrection physically possible. Constant vigilance is his cosmological contribution, ensuring that the chaos of the desert and the demonic forces of Set are perpetually repelled from the tomb, maintaining the stability required for the entire afterlife system to function. While Osiris provided the promise of eternal life, Anubis provided the guarantee, the indispensable on-the-ground execution of every ritual step, every magical protection, and every ethical assessment. His power, rooted in the primal knowledge of decay and elevated by unwavering loyalty to order, remains the silent, necessary force that transformed the terror of death into the ordered promise of the field of reeds, cementing his status as the eternal, essential sentinel of the Egyptian soul.
The journey ends here, at the side of the scales, where the fate of eternity is decided. The vast, ordered cosmos created by Ra and secured by Osiris rests on the simple, unyielding judgment delivered by the jackal god. And as the balance finally tips, the only certainty that echoes through the hall of two truths is this: fear not the darkness of the grave, for that is mere shadow. Fear the silence after the scales, for it is there that the eternal truth is revealed. Immortality is not a gift of the gods, but a ritual of the heart, and the price of forgetfulness is absolute annihilation.